Nico, can you hear me?
I can hear you great, Dustin.
Okay, thanks.
All good? Okay, I'll call the City Council meeting, City of Dunsmuir, to order. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Arth? Here. There he is. Councilmember Lucchese? Here. Councilmember Keisler?
Here.
Mayor Bryan is absent, and how about Vice Mayor?
Here. Okay, with that in mind, we have the flag salute. Should have done that first. Dave, would you like to lead us on this?
Absolutely. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, with that in mind, our first item tonight is a special presentation from our town historian, Ron McLeod. Ron, would you please give us a little bit of history?
I will try. When we all came in here for this meeting, we all walked past something in front of this building without paying it much notice, and I wanted to talk about that. The little cannon that sits just to the left of the entry. We call it a cannon. It's not really a cannon in the old sense of the word. It's from World War I. It's a souvenir from World War I. It's a single shot. It's not a semi-automatic, so we don't have to have any special permits or anything. But it is, I notice, aimed slightly to the north of City Hall. And if it could be tweaked to just a few degrees to the south, it might be more effective. World War I was from 1914 to 1918. And at that time was called the War to End All Wars. And that hasn't really worked out really well. In 1919, another thing that hadn't worked out well, the US Treasury was bankrupt. The expenses of fighting the war had drained all of the funds out. So they came up with a novel idea called war bonds. It was repeated again in World War II. You may have heard of them then. They're also called victory loans. There were two issues, a 3-year and a 4-year, and they accrued 3.75% interest or 4.75% interest in denominations ranging from $50 to $10,000. Average citizens could buy these and hold them for 3 years or 4 years and make a little bit of money on them. The goal was to raise $4.5 billion. To promote the sale of the bonds, there were some special trains that were assembled. 2 of them on the West Coast. One of them was assembled in San Francisco and the other was assembled right here in Dunsmuir. And these were trains that were to tour the country and promote the sale of war bonds or victory loans. The Dunsmuir train was accompanied by a Navy band, an American Whippet tank, and, quote, American dogs of war, unquote, which sounds kind of fearsome. The train was included an exhibit of souvenirs of World War I and the victory that took place in Europe. There were German armaments. There were tanks, a German Albatross airplane. There were uniforms, guns, shells, and all kinds of armaments, including light artillery pieces such as the German 77. 77 is 77 millimeters, which is just a little bit less than 3 inches. Dunsmuir's cannon, the little guy out front, is a German 77. It was, the official term for that is it's a light mobile field gun. It's not a real cannon in the sense of like we see in the movies where they light the fuse and fire it off. It fired a variety of projectiles, including explosive shells, shrapnel, and armor-piercing tank rounds. The Germans produced over 5,000 of these during World War I, and that formed 35% of their artillery weapons. This particular cannon was probably captured in France or Belgium, which is where most of the fighting took place. When this touring train ended up its tour, it came back to Dunsmuir and was disassembled. For some reason, the cannon was left, along with another one that's in Mount Shasta in front of the City Hall. This lot that this building sits on was purchased by the city of Dunsmuir in 1910, and it took 15 years to build this building. It was completed in 1925. During that time, sometime, the cannon was mounted on a special concrete platform. Later, the wooden wheels were replaced by steel spoked wheels, and there have been many, many coats of paint over the years that have protected it from rust and deterioration. Over the years, it's really hard to imagine. It's been over 100 years since World War I. It's hard to imagine the political fervor that was rampant in the country at that time. In 1923, the Knights of Pythias, which was a fraternal organization that was quite influential in the town, erected the fountain down by the California Theater. It's a memorial to the Siskiyou County World War I veterans, and that fountain is still there. So our little cannon is kind of a memorial that can remind us of that patriotism and the sacrifice that was made. Over 9 million combatants died in the war, and that included 126,000 Americans. Interestingly, we have no plaque that tells the story about the little cannon, and maybe that's something to be considered. It'd be nice. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. McLeod?
Peter?
The little boy in me wants to ask, do you think it could fire today?
It's got a plug in the barrel. And I don't know how.
Welded in
I
or?
don't know. I don't know if it's permanent or if it could be.
Well,
removed.
for community celebrations.
Huh?
I believe they probably have to decommission those.
I would imagine so. Yeah. And we'd have to change the aim a little bit.
Hey, thank you. Ron,
Sure. Yes.
thank you for that. That was awesome.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Okay, with that in mind, we'll move into public comment. Public comments are limited to 3
I
minutes.
believe we do have another presentation from the rail yard restoration project.
We moved that further down on the
Oh,
agenda.
okay.
Yeah,
Thank
we're
you.
gonna have that in the thing
Sorry.
itself. That's okay.
I read my agenda
I
packet.
didn't get it either, but okay.
Well, one thing I'd like to point out at this point was something we learned when we went down to the League of California Cities Conference in Long Beach last week. And we had to, once again, every 2 years, we have to renew our ethics training, Brown Act training. And one of the things that was pointed out was that it is against the Brown Act to comment after a comment is made, a public comment, for us to comment on it, because it's not on the agenda and we can't be discussing things that are not there. So I just want to let you know, moving into that, at least while I'm working it, I'm going to be a little bit sensitive to that. So although it sounds really logical to say you got a question, what's the answer? According to our training, we're not supposed to be discussing after that. So with that in mind, I'll open it up to public comment. If you're in here in the room, please step
Mr.
forward.
Mayor,
Yes.
on that note, to clarify what he said, in public comment, if you say something, we cannot respond. Even if you leave the building, like some people have a tendency to do, and we used to wait around till the end and kind of respond and give a little bit of, feedback or we can't do that. We cannot respond to you at public comment, no matter what you say during the meeting. See us after the meeting. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. So any public comment from the members in the room here? Wendy, do we have anybody on the line there?
Any raised hands?
Yeah, so if you want to make a comment and you're on Zoom, you go to the reactions tab and hit raise your hand. It doesn't look like anybody's doing that.
Okay, I guess we scared everybody away. Council and staff report or comments. City manager. And if you haven't been here for a while, we do have a new city manager, Dustin Reef from the great state of Nebraska.
Yes, thank you. I don't need an applause. So just a couple of updates on some ongoing work in town. And so as we're getting closer to winter and our water utility projects are starting to wrap up, we do have a number of streets that will have some asphalt work done on them, beginning the week of the 26th through the 30th. And so that includes Dunsmuir Avenue, Shasta, Castle, Pine Avenue, Pine Street, Olive Street, Orange Street, Willow, Hart, Hemlock, and Cave. And so all of those residents in those areas are very well aware of the work we've been doing. And so this is just kind of the capping it off for the winter. And so that work will be done the week after this next one.
I have a question on that. On Shasta Avenue, because the rise from when you turn left from Pine Street going up, that area has been over and over and over again, water main breaks. And so on the one hand, there were new lines put in, and I understand the asphalt is supposed to cover that. But if there's any way of covering that ascending part right there, it's just the whole road is a mess.
Dilapidated is the word for it, but.
I'm just saying,
I
we can
believe
take a
that all
look
the
at
work
it.
has been done and it's ready for,
I'll look
a
at it.
hat,
Yeah.
a new coat of. That's
Correct.
right.
Anyway, thank you.
Yeah.
And then we also, they're still doing work down in the Shasta Retreat area. And that's been kind of a busy area this last week. And then also the tank project's ongoing. It looks like that will carry on for a little while longer yet.
Okay, anything else? Any questions for the city manager? I do have one that I had somebody ask me, and I'll just throw it out. Karen Spivak, the librarian, asked me to check on the latest on the roof. Do we know what's going on with that?
I am aware of that, and I need to discuss it with Blake when he gets back on Monday.
Okay, so I'm just poking.
Yep, nope, it's number one on my list for Monday.
Great, thank you, sir. Sergeant Ortiz.
Thank you. So the month of August, we've, at this point, 16% of the fiscal year is complete. We've moved up to 14% of the contracted hours. I think that the numbers are probably a little bit low based on the wildfires. And that's not meaning that people weren't in the city of Dunsmuir patrolling, meaning that they didn't get their hours turned into our dispatch who compiles this. So I'm anticipating more hours. Last month, we had 187 calls for service or radio calls. Anytime a deputy puts themselves out with somebody, anytime the radio is activated in an incident would be a call for service for this purpose. Last year, we had 175, so that's fairly consistent. We took a total of 18 cases. We conducted 20 traffic stops. Last year, we had 12. 12 citations were issued, 7 were traffic related, 5 were misdemeanor cite and release arrest warrants. We had 8 misdemeanor arrests and 1 felony arrest. Notable cases, we had the house fire that I spoke of last month on Shasta Avenue. We did have a domestic violence incident on the 6100 block in Eleanor. Both parties wound up being arrested at the misdemeanor level, meaning it was kind of a mutual combat type shoving match that caused their arrest. Deputy Evans conducted a traffic stop at Dunsmuir Avenue and Sacramento Avenue. He contacted the motorist and ultimately wound up seizing 6 pounds of marijuana. I realize that's probably a bigger deal 10 years ago, but he did. Same deputy Evans also contacted 2 suspicious males during the early morning hours out in front of the Dunsmuir tire shop and got a personal amount of methamphetamine and an arrest out of that. They did have a felony arrest for domestic violence that took place on the 6200 block of Dunsmuir Avenue. After the male subject was reported to have tried to run his significant other down the vehicle. Luckily he missed, but he was arrested for felony charges. And then Deputy Evans was kind of the active deputy this month. I realize it's not the city limits of Dunsmuir, but I thought it was noteworthy. Shortly before midnight, August 30th, he's patrolling and he spots a strange vehicle or a vehicle he didn't recognize parked in that wide spot near Panorama in Dunsmuir Avenue. Thankfully, he has a good knowledge of his assigned area, his beat, and found it suspicious, and he's not lazy, so he got out and tried to contact the occupant and found it was a male without releasing much information about the man. He was born in 1985, so he wasn't old by any stretch, but he was unresponsive, and it turns out he was suffering a pretty major medical emergency and wound up being transported up to Mercy Medical Center. And Deputy Evans actually contacted the doctors and the emergency room staff. And they told him it's fortunate that he'd happened to cross this young man, because he would have, there was no doubt, would have perished had somebody not noticed him. The late hour, the fact he's by himself, if he'd gone unnoticed, he'd have probably died.
Can you send our regards on to the deputy?
How is the guy?
I will. As far as I know, he's fine. Well, he's better than he was when Deputy Evans saw him, at least. So I think he's doing better, but I haven't checked.
How's the, may I ask, how's the lady from the fire on Shasta Avenue? Is she okay?
As far as I know.
Okay, thank you.
So the calls for service, I monitored last year along with this year. We seem to be, we're busier in the areas we should be, such as security checks, patrol checks, school checks, bar checks. We're a lot higher on those. When my deputies go out with a subject, that's that suspicious person walking down the street in the middle of the night. Last year we had 8. This year we're up to 25. Suspicious vehicles. This year we had 10. Last year we were out to 6. So I'm happy with the proactivity and the community-oriented policing that seems to be taking place. And yeah, there's no huge jumps, increases or declines, but I was proud of those figures there.
Same with drugs?
The drugs were down.
Sweet, good job, thank you.
I think that's Mark, getting rid of drug houses. That's a huge attribute.
I talked to him today. I ran into him and I told him we appreciate all the work and the fact that you said that he was responsible for cutting down. He said there's still too many, so I guess he's hard at work at it, but I appreciate the work he's been doing.
I'm his biggest fan. So and that's all I have to report.
Questions? If not, no questions. Mr. Arth.
I've been reflecting on the comment you made earlier on, and Councilmember Keisler on the Brown Act. And do you have anything in writing to support what you said?
I'll work to get it. That's what we were told. We asked the question.
Well, it's obvious, especially with the new city manager.
He was there.
We need to have Brown Act training. The whole point of the Brown Act is to make sure people get to participate in their government. So what you said makes no sense to me whatsoever. And I'm not changing my practice. If a citizen gets up at the podium and says, I've got a problem, I feel like I represent that person and I'm going to try to solve their problem. And if it involves interchange, this is exactly what Tim Holt has been after forever. The Brown Act is not supposed to put a wedge between the people we represent and us. So I doubt it.
It's not on the agenda. We're here to talk about what is on the agenda.
Let's not get into this right now. I hear your concerns and I'll take them up and look into it.
Well, I'd like to hear from the city attorney.
I agree. That's what I'll do. Look into it.
That's all.
Ms. Lucchese.
Speaking of, I talked to John earlier this week about an unrelated matter, and he actually was going to reach out, if he hasn't yet, to talk about doing an ethics training and Brown Act training, and just kind of come up and give support to city staff. So he should actually be in contact arranging that.
And Dustin wasn't able to attend that. He had to go to the city manager, so it'll be good for him too, then too.
Yeah, that's
You
what.
were at our,
I was there the first half. The second half, I had to go to another section.
So he's fine. We'll get him on the other hand.
Yeah, so John and I already talked about that. And then the only other thing is I was gonna send out an email, just trying to arrange the pre-agenda meetings again. I just noticed, and thank you guys so much for doing the special meeting stuff and for the PLHA. It just reminded me that we need to start those back up just to kind of catch little things like that beforehand. And I realized you're like 3 weeks on the job and I'm trying not to be overwhelming. And then I didn't forget about solid waste or anything. I rethought meeting while the city manager was gone, and we should probably wait, get them on board, because we do need city staff available to help us with some of the budgeting pieces. So it is something we will follow up on soon.
Committee reports.
Yes, so thank you. And that is it.
Where is
for-
committee reports?
It's next. It's next. This is for the 7 o'clock meeting.
See, I didn't get the other agenda.
Oh.
It's all right.
But that's it for me today.
Okay, Mr. Keisler.
Yeah, the first thing I want to say is thank you to the sheriff's office. You guys have been doing an outstanding job, from car fires to little fires, so I appreciate you guys. I don't know if you guys noticed on your way down here or are aware, but the farmer's market's going on Thursday. It looked like it was a pretty big event up there today. And there's also a football game tonight at 7 o'clock. Just saying. The steampunk event is coming up September 24th and 25th. And I'm really excited about this one because we got a Rat Rod show, we got some great music. But one of the things that we really got is a bunch of us got together and we threw in a box and we're getting stuff together. And this was Mr. Bailey's idea in the back, but it's a 2-day event. And what we're going to do is we're going to have the kids come to us with ideas, and then we're going to start grabbing pieces, and they can grab pieces out of the box, and we can help them put this idea into motion. They got all day Saturday to do it, and then we'll have a contest on Sunday. I thought it was a killer idea. It's a way to get them involved. I'm really looking forward to it, and I am encouraging everybody to come out and have a really good time the 24th and 25th for the steampunk event. On top of that, I'm good, thanks. By the way, Long Beach was 105 degrees and 110% humidity.
The other thing I'd like to add is that for the steampunk on Sunday morning, from I think it's 8:30 to 11.
8 to 10:30.
8 to 10:30, the Rotary Club will be putting on a pancake breakfast at the Catholic Church building.
It's not the church, it's the place where you have the, the
Cafeteria.
spaghetti dinners and
Yeah.
rigatoni dinners.
Yep. So that's all I have, actually. So we'll move on. Do you have anything else?
I have a quick question. So for those of us who went to the California League of Cities conference, are you guys planning to do like kind of a memo or something to the rest of us who couldn't go? And
That's a
just,
good idea.
or like a special presentation at the next meeting, just to kind of summarize the
Things we learned.
highlights?
Yeah.
I just figure if we're paying for people to go, it should
Sure.
come back to the community and be an open thing and share that information.
Everybody hit different things, so everybody would have to kind of give you a different update. But-
We'll work it. That's a good idea if we
but
put that
yeah,
on the
I'd
next
like to
agenda.
report back what I learned from the Paradise.
Okay.
It'll be on the next agenda.
And the rural cities, I think you'll all be pretty excited about.
Okay, onward and upward, committee reports. What committees have met to report?
Well, we need to have a conversation about the aspirations of the Solid Waste Committee. We wanted to have 2 neighborhood cleanup days sponsored by Clemens. We wanted to have a Saturday green waste chipper experiment with disposing of our green waste. And unfortunately, Blake has been out. So the conversation between A Cut Above and the city of Dunsmuir, I suspect, never happened. And as far as Clemens and the 2 planned days, one of them was supposed to be 2 days from now, the other one's next week. And I'm simply going to assume those aren't happening.
Yeah,
So
They're not happening?
I don't believe they are.
I don't believe they are, because we need, again, for the
Need more,
city
more
manager's
resources,
benefit,
yes.
Yeah,
members of the committee, 2 citizens and 2 city council members, we can only do so much to tee up these events. Then we rely on staff. And
We've been pretty-
underscored by the fires to the
Right.
north of us, as you well know, it was just sort of a chaotic 2 weeks. But I hope we don't abandon it. It would be perfectly easy to shift this into next month and keep trying. So
I'll
We'll
chat with you on Monday about kind of that discussion, and then
Thank you.
we can follow up with some date's probably a month out. Give us some time to react.
Thank you.
Juliana?
That's it. We did not have any other finance meetings or anything because Blake is still out.
Well, there was one meeting, I'm not sure. Cheryl, did you want to give any report on the chamber meeting last night? I didn't know if that's why you were here. So the chamber met last night. It was a productive meeting, and they're zooming on forward to the steampunk event. That's kind of the big thing on the horizon right now. And other than that, I'll leave it at that. Okay, no other committee
Hold on.
reports.
Wait.
What?
I know Matthew's not here, but I do, we do need to meet to discuss the Public Works building soon. So I know you're on that committee. So I'll be reaching out early next week after Matthew gets back, and we can kind of iron out a date so we can have some discussion. I've kind of been waiting on Blake as well because I need some of that budget and historical knowledge, so.
Makes sense.
Good.
Okay.
Whenever,
All right, thank you.
We have approval of minutes. Any
make a
questions?
motion to approve the minutes from September 1st, 2022.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Next, we have the consent agenda. We have two items on the consent agenda. We have the check register and the street closures for Steampunk.
I make a motion to adopt the consent agenda.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None opposed. Public hearing, no public hearing. Next, old business. This is early then,
I
isn't
think
it?
we need to come back to that one after we do the
Right.
others, because we.
Okay,
have to
so what we're
schedule
doing tonight
specials.
is, let me take a moment to explain. There was some documents that are essential for the next item on the list, which has to do with housing. And with that in mind, we had to schedule a special meeting in order to meet the requirements of getting the documentation out in time. So it's a little strange. What we're gonna do is when we get to 7 o'clock, we're gonna switch over and start a separate meeting, which will simply have that one item on it and come back to the other. So with that in mind, we'll move on from the PLHA funding. And I notice Ms. Bryan is here, so hello. And then we'll move on then instead to
New business?
new business. Discuss draft traffic plan for Dunsmuir Railroad remediation project. Anna Burkholder. Welcome back.
Thank you. I think Wendy's gonna try and put a couple slides up. So again, thank you for having me. I'm Anna Burkholder with California Department of Fish and Wildlife Office of Spill Prevention and Response. And I'm the liaison officer for the Unified Command for the project at the Dunsmuir Rail Yard remediation project, basically. So earlier this week, I emailed Dustin the draft traffic control plan. I don't know if you had a chance to look at that ahead of tonight. So I just want to kind of go through some elements of it, and then we would love your feedback. What are your comments, concerns about the plan? Again, it's a draft plan, so we, happy to incorporate what we can. So go ahead, Wendy. So I picked out just some key elements out of the plan that I felt were more relevant to in-town parts versus just what's going on in the rail yard. So the traffic activities are going to include mobilization and demobilization of equipment. Some of that has occurred, I believe, already. Subcontractor vendor deliveries, transportation of materials from the north yard to the south yard, and then just general site truck use. We'll have your figures here in a second. We'll show you that.
Could you kind of step back for a
Yes.
moment? And for the people that don't know what's going on, and it's the
Yes.
first time they've heard something, could you just give a real short overview of what's going on and why we need to know about this?
Appreciate that. Thank you. So, and back to why we're doing this project at all. Is that what you're asking? Okay, perfect.
We kind of had a go brief into that, but then the idea that you've got these trucks moving all
Yes.
over, that's what we're kind of looking at.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. So there's historic contamination of the Dunsmuir Rail Yard site. They used to store fuels on there from the 1920s with railroad ties or redwood planks at the bottom. So everything just seeps into the ground. So there's a lot of contamination in the yard.
Some of that has been leaking into the river as well. In 2018, there was a citizen report, so that's how we got involved, OSFR got involved. So we know there's contamination of the site. EPA and the Water Board have issued cleanup and abatement orders. One of them's an emergency order, so we want to take care of it quickly. So the plan is to excavate a lot of that, or all of the contaminated material, move it to the south yard, and then, so they're preparing that site. It'll kind of sit there until they can move it to hazmat. But we're also gonna bring in clean fill. So that's why we need transportation of contaminated stuff out and clean stuff coming
Great.
in.
That's a good setup. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for asking. So I'll bring up the figures here in a minute, and just to clarify too, these patterns and routes are for this construction season. And we're gonna have to stop, when the weather changes and, we can't work anymore. So when 2023 construction season starts, we can update it if conditions change or, whatever we need. Okay, go ahead, Wendy, thank you. So I clipped some of the pictures out. It looks like we can see those fairly well. So there's gonna be 4 figures in here. A lot of this is showing basically what's going on inside the rail yard. You can see the entrance. Sorry, I do have a pointer. It's not gonna work on the screen. I apologize. Anyway, you know how you get into the rail yard, and then just kind of how the transportation's going on there, and then an employee parking lot. So I think most of this slide is just showing what's going on inside the rail yard. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is showing the route from the north rail yard coming out by the bridge, and then the route headed to the south stockpile area. And that's going along Sacramento Avenue to excuse me if I'm not pronouncing that right, Scherer Avenue to the south stockpile area. So just kind of a straight shot. It's easy for me to say, I don't live in town, right? Next picture, please, Wendy. And I think this is just showing the continuation of the truck route going to the actual south stockpile area there at the end in the blue. And then one more piece, please, Wendy. So this is kind of the bigger piece. Coming off of I-5, either northbound or southbound, and then the route on Dunsmuir Avenue, coming down to Sacramento Avenue, and then into the rail yard. So I know that might be the biggest concern, that piece right there. So that's sort of the draft plan. And again, hopefully you had a chance to kind of absorb, what was in the plan. And again, I'm happy to, if you have feedback for me today, I'm happy to kind of write that down. I will try to answer questions if you have any. If I don't have the answers, I will get answers for you.
Do we have a time of the day kind of sequence there? Are we gonna stop it in a reasonable hour, or are we gonna have trucks driving through late at night?
Well, I don't believe late at night. I will clarify that for you. I know the work hours for the rail yard are, I believe, are 7 a.m. to, it might go to about 5 p.m., 5:30 p.m. at the latest. I will clarify that for you.
Yeah, that's just something I think we'd want to know ahead of time.
I think that's a great question.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
I have 2 concerns.
Okay.
The section of road going into the south yard,
Okay.
a lot of trees.
Okay.
I've seen the railroad guys break branches.
Okay.
They stopped and cleaned it up, but I don't know what kind of trucks you're anticipating, or if it's gonna be heavier equipment. It's just something to maybe look at.
Okay. So the route going into the south yard,
Right.
trees, and you've seen lots of trucks hitting them and knocking.
Oh,
Yeah. Okay.
That's how they get trimmed.
Yeah, they have that perfect little
Yeah, canopy.
yes.
So that's a concern.
Okay.
And then, coming down the hill,
Okay.
they're coming in, they're gonna go south behind the Dunsmuir Inn and Suites.
Okay.
They're coming down the hill. We need to take a look at that road for that traffic. That's all.
Okay. Dunsmuir Inn and Suites.
That came down that hill
Yeah.
face first this far off the ground. I've seen that street firsthand, and now that I'm thinking about all this construction, I'm really worried about traffic on that part of the road. Those
Is-
are my only two concerns.
Well, that's fine. So is that section of road behind the Inn and Suites kind of a hairy section? You're coming
When you
down?
come past, get to the post office,
Okay,
from there down to the bottom is my concern.
Okay.
And thank you.
absolutely. Thank you.
Mr. R, Ms. Lucchese, any comments, questions?
I don't have any questions, but I'll wait for comments until
Okay.
after public comment.
Dustin, a question?
No, I'm just thinking in my head on how to better kind of accommodate, the traffic flow. I mean, we did discuss it previously to her coming here and presenting this, so we'll discuss it offline as far as the concerns around that
Okay.
steep slope.
That makes
And
sense.
yeah, I don't know that there's a better route,
Okay.
but we can look at it.
Okay, great.
Okay, what I'll do now is, if you'd like to have a seat, I'll go into public comment, and then, or do you have anything more you want to talk to about?
I did. I
Okay,
wanted
go
to
ahead.
sneak in one more thing, and I apologize, Dustin, because this was told, I was asked to do this after I gave you my agenda
I saw it
item.
this afternoon, so,
Okay,
or
perfect.
late.
So Wendy, if you don't mind forwarding. So I was asked to present to you, actually, before you move forward, if you haven't. So as you know, along the rail yard, we currently have boom in the water. And that's to hold back, any sheen that's coming out, prevent oil from going down the river. In the event that when work begins, if we have a larger sheen or some oil that escapes and is gonna go into the river, the first stopping point that we can do is, since we have the boom already out in the water, somewhere, again, I'm sorry, I can't use my pointer, but somewhere near the
Butterfly Bridge.
Butterfly Bridge, probably about here, there's wherever the tail end of the boom is, we can put it across the river instead of just along the road. So that'll be our first stopping point. Okay, so Wendy, if you don't mind. So what we're asking about, or would like to tell you, is it forwarding, Wendy?
Do you want
Sorry.
to go to the next slide?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Next
No
slide,
worries.
please. Okay, so what we're looking at is, at this location, on, again, Scherer Avenue, there appears to be, I think there's a small pool in the river, and I think it's a place where we release fish into the river. And then potentially, I assume this might be like a vacant lot right in there between those houses, I'm not sure. We would like to look at that area for a secondary place just to potentially put up boom if we need it. Now what that would entail is we would like to take crews out there to practice, and then maybe set up anchors on either side of the river. We won't have boom just sitting out there, of course, but have it ready to go. So this would be the next closest place that we could set up boom, again, in the event that there's a release in the rail yard. If we don't have this site, the next site is about a mile downriver at one of our geographic response plan sites. So, so I'm here to just let you know we're looking into this. And if anybody has any we were gonna go talk to residents and gain access to that part of the river, to take a look again. I think there's good access. It just looked like a good site to our unified command. If anybody here has any information about that lot, we're all ears.
We
After the meeting.
can get you property owner information.
Okay, of course. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. But anyway, I just, wanted to let you know that we're looking into that.
So that would be in case something happened, and this would be an emergency, you gotta practice how to get it out there in a hurry and get it set up ahead of time so you can do that, right?
Correct. So yes, so we would,
Better safe than sorry.
better safe than sorry, we'd want to prepare ahead of time, go practice, take some boom out there, train the crews, but then just have anchor points ready to go. So that if something happens, we can get down there in a hurry and set up the boom across the river. So that's what we're looking at.
Okay.
Any thoughts about that right now? Okay. Yes.
On my afternoon walk, Envirocon was practicing this afternoon
Yes.
and having a very good time.
Excellent.
My concern is the city is accountable for discharges into the upper Sac,
Okay,
primarily from our sewage plant.
okay,
And it's mostly a dilution is the solution as we get into the winter months. So I just want to make sure the State Water Resources Control Board is tracking what we put in the river compared to what Union Pacific puts in the river.
okay.
So I can kind of comment on that. So the stuff that comes out of our wastewater plants, actually, we check it before it actually hits the river. So we always have a bead on what's actually going in. And so that I'm not too concerned about, but definitely we'll make sure they're aware.
Thank you. Okay,
I think you got through it great.
excellent.
We'll see if there's any questions or
Yeah,
comments
I
coming up. but
appreciate you giving me some time tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With that in mind, are there any public comments from inside the building?
Don't
And
wanna
if
raise
not,
their hand.
do we have anybody from outside the building? Wendy, anybody out there?
How do they raise their hand again,
Nobody
Wendy?
out there.
Okay, with that in mind, I'll open it up, bring it back, close public comment, and move it on to discussion.
So yeah, I have a couple of things. So in terms of comments about the traffic plan, so Sacramento Avenue is a subpar width, and so that's kind of one of the bigger concerns. So that portion from the post office that we're talking about going south where it reconnects to Pine Street is subpar in width. So I'm curious if we're able to coordinate better on the dates that we're gonna be moving and the hours so that we could post no parking signs just during the day so that we can have as much width on that road as possible. Because as it sits right now, if someone's parked on the, you can't park on the east side of the street, but you can on the west side. If someone is parked on the west side of the street, you cannot have two vehicles pass. And especially if you have soil moving vehicles, they're much wider than a typical vehicle. So that's going to be an issue, but I think that's something maybe we could talk about as a council at a future meeting, is putting in some temporary parking measures to solve some of that issue. The other thing too is I'm not aware of the level of environmental review that's needed for this type of activity, especially if it has an emergency designation. But one of the concerns I have is roadway impacts from the soil removal and the soil excavation and bringing it in. That tends to be really heavy. And so I'm curious if CDFW is going to be, or Union Pacific is going to be made to compensate the city of Dunsmuir for the decrease in age of the roads based off of impacts from shipping dirt. Dirt's really heavy.
That's how we actually got to this conversation, was the discussion in the rail yard when we were doing a walkthrough. And so this is the initial draft, and that was my thought process was, okay, well, if I need to know where they're going first, and then let's discuss exactly what you're talking about. So
Yeah, there's
Good job.
there's really good data out of Wisconsin. I've worked with frac sand mining vehicles and taking a look at what the added weight does to roadways and the decrease in age of the road. And by decrease in age, so when you put in a road, you have an estimated amount of time that it's good, usually 30 to 40 years, depending on the roadway material. And the more weight you have per axle impacts that roadway age. And so I think that's something really important to look at, because we usually don't get compensated from Caltrans projects that do that. But you can see that the additional weights in those types of vehicles out of the ordinary span of time have a huge impact on roads. So I think that's something I would like to keep in mind as we move forward, is that if we do have a significant deterioration from the start to finish, I think that we should ask for compensation for that. That's it.
Mr. Arthur, any questions, comments?
No, as Councilmember Lucchese was talking, it occurred to me, why aren't we using rail cars instead of trucks to get rid of the dirt?
So to get rid of it, that is the intention, because they're going to ship it out of state to get rid of the contaminated soils.
I assume so.
What we saw there with the Dunsmuir Avenue down onto Sacramento, that is for the inbound, and so all of that is coming from up at the quarry. So it's not coming. It's local.
It's Mount Shasta.
Yeah, Mount Shasta. So it's it's local, so getting it on a rail, I mean, the logistics just don't map out for inbound, but the outbound dirt, once they get it to the storage yard and the south, it will be at some point transported by rail to wherever they remove it to.
I just hope Union Pacific is bending over backwards to accommodate the city of Dunsmuir.
Well,
That's
I,
all.
I meet with them every 2 weeks via Zoom. And so if you have any concerns, and they will be on site next week, and I have a meeting with them as well. So if you have any concerns, just let me know and I can bring those up.
Talk to you on Monday.
Sounds good.
Dave, any questions, comments?
No, I've addressed mine, and she addressed the rest of them.
Okay, so with that in mind, unless there's anything else, we'll call this closed and direction to staff given.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, looks like we'll be coming into 7 o'clock at about a good time. We have one more item left on our original agenda, and that's selection of consultant to complete 6th cycle of the housing element update. Is that Rico?
Yeah, good evening. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to keep this really simple. It's a very long story, but you don't have time for it tonight. So I'm just going to tell you, we've got a proposal to update the housing element that meets all the requirements of the RFP, the request for proposals. The proposal that we received from the people that we're recommending, Plan West Partners, was very responsive to the scope of work in the RFP. The firm has demonstrated successes preparing housing elements in the region. In fact, they're currently preparing Mount Shasta's and Wairika's. I've spoken with Vanessa at Plan West Partners off and on over the past 6 months. I've enjoyed each of those interactions. I've heard nothing but good things about them from Councilmember Lucchese, who's working with them in Wairika. The proposed timeline, this is critically important, as discussed in your staff report, but the proposed timeline for certification of the housing element is consistent with that of the SB2 planning grant, which is October 31st of 2023. And the proposed budget is consistent with the grant, which is $87,184. In fact, we received 2 proposals very close to each other. There's a significant difference of $392 between the 2. But Plan West Partners did a much better job responding to the RFP. In fact, the other firm, their proposal lacked one of the tasks in the scope of work. And their timeline was 6 to 7 months longer than that proposed by Plan West. So it was a fairly easy decision. And what we'll be talking about eventually, but not really so important right now, is that eventually housing elements have gotten so expensive. You heard me say $87,000 to do this. Eventually we're all going to have to just do this together. There's only 44,000 of us in the county. We all need to be doing a multi-jurisdictional element, saving all of our resources for better projects. And with Plan West preparing Wairika's and Mount Shasta's, everything will be formatted very similarly, similar styles and whatnot, so that we can pick this up next go around. So anyway, I am recommending that the council authorize the city manager to negotiate and enter into an agreement with Plan West Partners to complete the housing element for up to $90,000. The proposal is $87,184, but just in case we have any changes, scope of work that come about through the negotiations, we've got an approved budget through HCD of 90. So I'm just requesting that you authorize the city manager to go up to that full amount in case we have any changes. And there's a suggested motion for you on page 2 of your staff report, which is page 45 of your agenda packet. And I just want to point out that Vanessa Blodgett with Plan West Partners is at this meeting right now. So if you have any questions for her.
The question I have, Rico, is timing. Could you be as clear as you can on when this has to be in by and how it looks like we're going to get there or not get there?
So the critical thing about timing, the timing is a very goofy thing. And you're just asked a very broad question, which is basically the housing elements initially were due in 2019. It's been one of those things that keeps getting extended and extended and extended, and which is fine, frankly. It was a good thing, but it has resulted in additional costs, additional tasks being required. And now it's sort of put us against the wall of getting this in before the grant is due, which the grant expenditure deadline is December 31st of 2023. However, HCD wants all grants, all expenditures in by September 15th of 2023, at which point we said, thank you, but no, we need as much time as possible. One of the considerable delays in this whole project, as you probably read in your staff report, was HCD. So we have until October 31st to get the housing element, frankly, really adopted. Certification is a whole nother issue that's going on in the state, and it has taken some cities over a year to get certified. And I know about 40% of the state, 40% of the housing elements that are out there as of a few months ago that have been adopted in the last year still had not been certified. It's been I'll just put it this way, HCD is imploding. But I think the longer thing is they're imploding right now. As we step back and we look at this next year in October, we should be fine. So I believe Vanessa's proposal calls for submittal to the state for the housing element in April or May of next year. HCD is just taking a very long time to review housing elements. Did that help, or did I confuse things?
So yeah, I guess really quick, I was gonna bring this up before we started, but we rolled really fast. So just for sake of transparency, I do work with Plan West in Wairika. I do not have a financial gain by whether they are hired or not. So I'm not going to step away unless other council members have an issue with that.
I'm good.
But yeah, no, basically what Rico said is true. Our deadline, the hard and fast deadline, is October of next year. And so
Wasn't the REAP that you talked about, wasn't that involved with the earlier deadline for the housing element?
no,
That's different.
no. So there's kind of sort of a soft deadline of housing elements of February of next year, but you have additional time after that, which is the hard and fast deadline. So we're fine.
Okay.
Everything's fine. Yes. So basically, if we do not have an adopted housing element by the end of October, then we're in kind of really deep stuff with
Next
the state.
October.
Yes. So we are fine right now.
Okay.
What we basically want to ensure is that we have captured as much cost as possible before this grant expires. And frankly, it's an adopted. So the deliverable on our grant is not a certified housing element. It is an adopted housing element. So all that truly matters is that it be adopted in that time. And that's the lion's share of the work. Certification, I've prepared many housing elements. I'm quite comfortable working with HCD. If it came down to that, we can take care of it. But frankly, the timeline that's been proposed is certification by October 31st of next year, which would be prior to our grant expenditure deadline.
The other question I have is, as we're looking at the airport and possibly developing that with the possibility of it being a housing element there, is that something we need to work into this going forward, or does it not have any impact on it?
So go ahead.
I was just going to say at this time, that would be premature. I would just say that, I think the housing element's going to look at our housing needs, do an assessment of that, and then sort of direct us to, through programs, policies and programs, what we should be doing to accommodate our housing needs in the future. And that may be, annexation of additional lands by the airport or whatever, infill development. It may be all sorts of things. So we'll just have to go through that process, provide comment to them as they're working on the document and see where but as far as, we don't want to slow anything down as far as sort of looking at the larger airport area at this time.
I think the better way to think about it is it's an element of the general plan.
Yeah.
The general plan is general.
Right.
So we don't get into super high detail except for some of the housing numbers that we're required to. And then the other thing to keep in mind is zoning is in the land use element and not necessarily in housing.
Okay,
So
that's what I was throwing me off.
housing may discuss changes we may need to make in our zoning, but in terms of change, it's associated more with the land use element.
Okay, I appreciate that. Any other questions before we get to public comment? Okay, I'll open up to public comment. If there's anybody here that would like to comment on this, please come to the podium. And if there's anybody outside there on the Zoom land, raise your hand with the reaction button. And if not, we'll move on. Any discussion before we go to a motion?
No, close public.
Close public comment. Thank you.
There is a suggested motion on page 2 of your staff report or page 45 of the agenda packet.
I have it, but is there any discussion?
Go for it.
I move that we authorize the city manager to negotiate and enter into a professional services agreement with Plan West Partners to update the city's housing element for up to $90,000 consistent with the city's SB2 planning grant.
Second.
Got a second? Do we need, is this spending money? Do we need to do a roll?
Yeah.
A roll call, please?
Councilmember Arth.
Aye.
And Councilmember Lucchese.
Aye.
Councilmember Keisler.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Deutsch.
Aye. Thank you very much. Okay, that motion carries.
Thank you, Rico.
Thank you all. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
We've got a few minutes. Let's do our future agenda items, and I have one. I've been asked several times by Tim Holt to include on one of the agenda items the request to waive or reduce the amount for murals on buildings, and I support the idea of looking into it. The point is that he wants to have it so that if somebody wants to put a mural on a building and it's approved by the planning commission and it helps the city, he doesn't think we should spend $400 or whatever it is for the thing. And I think that might be a reasonable thing to go forward with. So we could have it on the next agenda. Any other agenda items that we want to put on?
Well, when Finance Committee meets next, I've had a few discussions with the mayor, and the notion of moving, Tim Holt's talking about the library, of course. City-owned building, before we could put a mural on it, that wall has to be repaired. But why don't we move the library out of the community grant program and into a line item budget?
Well, I would recommend we have that go through the finance committee and bring it back to the council if they decide to do
And
that.
I'm just, in the absence of the mayor,
We hear you.
We can put that on.
We hear you, Peter.
well, there's actually a number of reforms that need to happen.
Let's start there. Huh?
Yeah, start there.
Let's start there.
And I know our city manager is already deep into imagining how to improve our protocols for getting things done and approved. So I think it'll all be part of a process there.
That was good. That's a good one, Peter.
And
Anything
of
else?
course, what is the status? Have we closed out last year's budget? Have we closed out the audit? Have
So-
we adopted a new budget yet?
When Blake comes back, that's the top priorities is to ensure all that stuff is finalized. The auditor, I believe, will be here at either the end of October or first part of November. And so all the closeout and everything will happen hopefully in the next, I guess, 45 days.
Thank you.
Okay.
And then we'll tackle budget after that.
Any other future agenda items?
Not me.
Okay, if not, what I'd like to do then is close this meeting, adjourn this meeting, take a break for 5 minutes, and then come back in at 7 o'clock for the special meeting. So nobody has to leave. If you'd like to do a restroom, I'm adjourning this meeting now. 5 minutes, we'll come back with a special meeting at 7.
Thank you,
Goodbye,
Ron.
Ron.
Have a good night, sir.
Thank you.
He's one of Dunsmuir's treasurers.
Takes a lot of,
Thank you.
it's interesting hearing all the background.
You guys win it.
And he's been around so long, he's got all the fun stuff.
We did win a trivia. We did.
I'll be at the restroom.
Anytime for
I
Sean.
like that to be, I thought that was a great thing.
It's a shame he wasn't able to be here to have the brother-sister thing going on. There's a whole dynamic.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you. I'll be in touch.
Good. Michael got a kitten for his birthday.
A kidney?
A kitten. No, I got, okay, so to be fair, that's not out of the ordinary because I did buy him a knee for his birthday. birthday once, so.
Oh, that's pretty sweet.
His 40th birthday, I bought him his 41st birthday, I was supposed
Ready to go, Wendy? Thank you, ma'am. Okay, I'm calling to order the special meeting of the City Council of Dunsmuir. And this is for one item on our agenda. We've already had our flag salute. We've done the roll call, no special presentations. We've already had public comment. Do we see a need to have public comment again? I don't think so. Anyone want to publicly comment? If not, we'll just pass. Okay, and so we go into old business.
Nothing makes me feel so at home here as the train in the background.
And let me introduce this. So this is the old business. It's PLHA funding, discuss and review a resolution 2022-21, authorizing application for and receipt of permanent local housing allocation program funds.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Madeline Bryan, and I am the housing coordinator with Siskiyou County Health and Human Services Agency. Before I get started, I just want to thank the council and the city staff, Dustin and Wendy, for working so hard to make this special meeting happen. HCD has thrown us a curveball, and they drastically reduced the timeline for this program. So we have had to ask the cities for urgent action on this. So as the housing coordinator for Health and Human Services, my role with the county is to develop programs and systems to address the needs of households that are experiencing housing instability. Typically those who are homeless or at risk of homelessness. So we really focus on the most vulnerable populations and are extremely active in pursuing solutions to homelessness. So today I'm here to talk to you about the Permanent Local Housing Allocation Program. I think that Councilmember Lucchese is extremely familiar with it, and maybe this will be familiar to some of you as well, so you can feel free to let me know if I should skip anything. My intention today is to give you some information about the basics of the program, what it can be used for, an overview of the application process, and my agency's specific interest in it. So this program was established, sorry, you can go to. So this program was established by the Building Homes and Jobs Act of 2017. It's based on a real estate transaction fee and provides ongoing revenue for this program, which is administered by the Department of Housing and Community Development. There are two types of funding through this program. One is a formula component, and that is an annual allocation that's given to every county and incorporated city. And then there is a competitive formula, a competitive component that is available only to non-entitlement jurisdictions. So that's also an option at some point for Dunsmuir if they're interested.
How is that? Are we entitled or not entitled?
You're a non-entitlement jurisdiction,
Okay.
yeah. Just think usually massive cities are entitlement jurisdictions. That's kind of the short way to think about it. So priority, this program can serve a range of income level households, but the priority population really is households that are making 60% or less of area median income. And they have just in the past released and closed two NOFAs, one in 2020 and one in 2021. And they released the current NOFA on August 17th, and it's due October 31st. And that's the big change and the reason for the urgency. It used to be available in April or May and due in December, at the end of December. So the program can be used for a variety of activities, and I have summarized them on the next two. Sorry. You want me to go two more? Yeah, go a couple more. I'll tell you when. There we go. Oh. So yeah, so this slide and the next one, I've summarized the uses. It can be used to develop affordable multifamily rental housing. It can be used for a variety of activities. including assisting persons who are experiencing or at risk of homelessness. And if you could go there, perfect. So to apply for this grant, jurisdictions have a few threshold requirements to meet, but the one that really sticks out, and that is currently a challenge for many jurisdictions, is that you have to have a currently certified housing element and have to be up to date on filing your housing element APR. So that's the really big threshold requirement. To submit the application, you have to, in addition to writing the application, you have to create a 5-year plan. And it's a really interesting setup where you apply for an estimate of 5 years worth of your allocation. And then in the remaining years within that period, you'll submit a streamlined application for the program. So that's, they don't know the exact revenue, right, until each year when they collect it.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing is that if we have to have a certified housing element, that means that theoretically we couldn't, or do we have one that's?
We do, we are current.
Right.
Okay, never
Yes.
mind.
So we
This one
need to
hasn't
get our
expired
new one.
yet.
Yes,
Get our new one.
yeah. So
Yeah.
our current one will expire next year.
Okay, thank
And
you.
so that's why we have to certify.
Yeah, it's my understanding that the jurisdictions in Siskiyou County are all current. It could be an issue when you go to submit your request for funds. So Dunsmuir would be current at the deadline still for the application. May not be current by the time you went to request the funding.
Okay, thank you.
So the 5-year plan has to explain how you're going to use these 5 years worth and which selected activities, how it will assist the priority population, and how those activities will contribute to meeting your housing element goals. This plan has to go through a public comment review period and have a public hearing and be authorized by the governing board. So there are a few limitations to how much time you have to collect this funding. An applicant can only apply for the current formula allocation and 2 prior NOFAs, and the initial application, right, with the 5-year plan has to be submitted within 48 months of the budget appropriations. So what this means effectively is that this current NOFA is the last opportunity that Dunsmuir has to collect all of its unclaimed allocations from the formula component. The funds that are not collected or claimed by that deadline will revert back to the state for their other multifamily housing programs.
Well, that sucks.
Yeah, that's a sentiment that I have found is shared across the entire county, every city actually. They'd rather the funding go anywhere but there. So Dunsmuir's allocation in 2020 was about $72,000. In the 2021 NOFA, it was about $111,000. The current NOFA has $124,000 approximately. So your 5-year estimate, right? So that would include the last 2 years, the current years, and the next 2 years is about $432,000.
So have we received this money in the past, or is this money sitting there waiting for us to get it and we haven't received it yet?
So Dunsmuir has never submitted their initial application.
Okay.
So
I don't believe any jurisdiction has in Siskiyou.
no, actually, if you go to the website and look at whatever the current NOFA is, if it's available, you can see which jurisdictions have claimed theirs. And currently, the county is the only jurisdiction that has.
Okay. But we're still entitled to that, $430,000 piece of pie?
So yes,
Yes?
you could claim all of it under the current NOFA, but after this NOFA closes, you will lose access to the first year's allocation and each year successively after that.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's just like with the FAA and the airport.
Yeah.
rolling
Okay, is it
5-year grant
similar
cycle.
structure?
Yeah.
So The program does provide an option for jurisdictions to delegate funding. The process for doing this is that a local government, and this is specifically for the formula component, not the competitive component. So a delegating jurisdiction would need to approve a resolution and authorize an agreement and enter into a legally binding agreement with the jurisdiction that they were delegating funding to. Whoever the recipient of the funding is would be responsible for all the requirements after that. So all of the accounting, monitoring, reporting, audits, submitting the application and writing the 5-year plans.
Could you
All
share-
of that
I'm sorry,
responsibility
could you
would
share
go to
with
the.
us a sense of a city that has used this money and particularly a city of our size and what they were able to do with it? I mean, that's what I'm kind of stuck with here. There's money out there, but for somebody like us, a city like us, what would we normally say, hey, here's an idea, here's what we want to do?
You know, I actually can't share that success story. I don't know if one. The experience that I have had speaking to every other city in Siskiyou County is that they don't feel that they have the capacity for this program to manage it themselves. And we have off the top of my head, probably about 30 different housing grants that we're managing right now at Health and Human Services. And this is by far one of the most complicated ones that we work on.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the honesty on that.
And it's also a matter of what you get for the effort you put out. The county's 5-year estimate is over 800,000. So 400,000 is not very significant when you consider the cost of the kind of projects that this funding would typically go towards, right? Development of affordable housing is extremely expensive. And we could talk more about that later if you want to. But it's extremely expensive.
I think, aren't you guys spending $250,000 a month on the hotel voucher program?
Well, that's hard to say because we use that model across so many different programs. But yeah, we had a grant for $250,000 that went in 3 or 4 months. You know, so we manage millions of dollars in housing funding. So any one city's allocation doesn't seem to be like a very significant amount. But I do believe that it's funding that belongs in the region and belongs to our communities. And that's a sentiment that's shared among many of the other cities as well. Like, why should this funding go back to the state? But so far, not a single city in there is one city in Siskiyou County that is exploring applying for this funding, and that's Tule Lake. So they're considering it, and I don't know of any other jurisdiction that is.
Would this be something that Mr. Arth might find interesting for his hope for a veterans home?
It's my understanding that you can select a subpopulation to focus on.
But they do need to meet the 60% AMI.
So not necessarily. It depends on the activity. Certain activities allow you to serve a higher level of income, like even up to 120%. It also depends on the area. Our area won't get any special waivers on that because we're not considered, you know, a high cost area compared to other parts of California. But certain activities allow you to serve higher levels and certain ones lower, right? Like activity 6, services for the homeless, they're going to be looking to serve 30% AMI, right? But regardless of which activity and what level of income you're allowed to serve, they are going to ask you to explain how your project is benefiting and serving the priority population. So maybe you're doing a project and maybe it isn't all low income. You still need to find some way to demonstrate that it's still going to benefit that 60% AMI.
Mr. Mayor,
Mm-hmm.
let the dumb guy ask a question, okay? So what I'm seeing is you coming here and you're telling us, you guys can get this. but you ain't got the capability, you ain't got the manpower, we ain't got, okay, I see that, but what you're asking us is to give it up, but, and you take our part and run with it to represent all of us, okay? Do we get a piece of that pie later down the road?
After the 5-year cycle.
So that's a great question and one that I get all the time. So as the county Health and Human Services Agency, every program that we do, every project that we develop is for the entire county. So technically, I mean, if you're delegating it to the county, anything that we do is supposed to be available to residents of Dunsmuir already. So I would say if there's concerns about access, that's another question, and certainly one that's important and we can explore. Are citizens of Dunsmuir able to access the services that they're eligible for? That's an important question. But anything that we do is available to any resident of Siskiyou County as long as they meet the program's eligibility criteria.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
I get it now.
Okay.
So for example, if the county were to utilize the PLHA funds that they get for a rental assistance program, it would be open to all of Siskiyou County.
Okay, that's cool.
Yes.
That makes it more people.
Any other questions before we turn it over to non-existent public comment? Yes.
Well,
I did have one more slide if you guys wanted to know about what we've done, but we don't need to. Want to go to the second to last one? Sorry, I've got it behind me, so yeah. So I think I already covered this in our discussion, but the county has applied for. We actually submitted our initial application and 5-year plan with the first NOFA that came out for the program, and we applied for the second round last year and received those funds, and we devoted those funds to a project called Siskiyou Crossroads. So we are developing, it's a new construction development, multifamily rental housing. It's a 50-unit apartment complex. 24 units are for formerly homeless individuals, and one is for an on-site manager, and the remaining 25 units are for low-income households, making up to 60% AMI. We currently have our funding needs met for this project, so there's a good chance that if we were to receive delegated funding from other jurisdictions, it may not go to Siskiyou Crossroads, but I just wanted to give an example of what we have been doing with our funding currently with PLHA. And so we use this funding to develop a continuum of services to meet the needs of those who are experiencing housing instability, right? And that can range from street outreach to that more visibly homeless population, rental assistance, all the way up to this development complex. It's like permanent housing projects and everything in between, interim sheltering. So what I'm offering you today is essentially 3 options, right? So if Dunsmuir has the capacity and interest in applying for these funds, well, we are thrilled to help support any capacity building of our partners. So please consider us a thought partner if you are interested in applying for these funds. The other option is, of course, you can let it revert to the state and apply, next year. And then, of course, you have the option to delegate funding to the county and be part of a collaborative for this project. Currently, it has been approved or is on the agenda this month for every other city in Siskiyou County. So that concludes my presentation, and we've already started the next slide, which is questions. Do you have any other questions for me?
Peter? Well, I think it'd be more useful to not take up the council's time and just have a private meeting, but I am interested in supportive veteran housing in Dunsmuir. And to access the funds that you've been speaking of, does the applicant have to be the city? Can the city work in cooperation with a nonprofit or another entity? Who is the eligible applicant?
Yeah, it's cities or counties. I know there are some programs in HCD, like there's Home Key, where there can be co-applicants. There's no co-applicant for this program. You can grant the funding. You could sub-grant the funding. You would still retain all responsibility for it and for monitoring those sub-grantees.
I mean, this, for any kind of housing, the city's not going to build it. They're going to have
Right.
to partner with.
No, absolutely. So, right. So what you would typically do is post or publish an RFP, right, and solicit proposals for this, and then a developer would be selected, and it's the developer typically that owns and manages the property. So you're absolutely right, and I can speak for the county, I think, in saying they have no interest in owning these properties or being landlords.
So the city would have to issue an RFP to show that we're interested.
I have a feeling we're going to be hearing from you in the months ahead.
Well, only if the city is a partner. The city has all these funds that we've never applied for.
Well, they are new. They just started in 2019, and so we're a third of the way through the 5-year cycle. But what they basically say is, if you haven't allocated or applied by that third year, it starts to eat up those previous years. So 2019
Exactly.
will be gone after this
Exactly.
year. A lot of the cities were not aware of the PLHA funds.
And we all sympathize.
You know, I did some outreach last year, and I spoke with your former city manager, but there has been so much change in the leadership, actually across many of the cities.
Yep.
So I think that this story and the outreach that I did may have gotten lost, in that process.
And
I think, poor Dustin just entered mid-conversation and didn't know we were very far down this path already.
my other is on page 5 of your presentation, formula eligible uses. I assume the eligibility is not just homes, single-family homes. It extends to multifamily as well?
Correct.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And that's what, the county's, our first year's allocation went to construction costs for our 50-unit apartment complex. It's not a very significant piece of that, right? Because that was 140 something thousand, from that first year. And it was about 25 million, right, in total cost. So any project of that size, or, it doesn't have to be 50 units, right? We could be talking about a much smaller number of units, but you would need to anticipate braiding a lot of other funding with it.
And that's sort of the point with the veterans, is you not only tap into the 2 presentations we've heard tonight, but the state of California Veteran Affairs, the federal government Veteran Affairs, they realize that veterans are being treated poorly. So there's all sorts of funds to access if someone will take the first step.
Yeah,
I'd
there
like
are.
to- Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just going to confirm that there are programs specifically for veterans, and there are the Housing Authority, and our Housing Authority is based in Shasta County. They have vouchers, specifically for veterans.
With this time, I'd like to give our city manager a chance to give his thoughts on this as part of the presentation.
Sure. So from my fire hose of information I've received in the last, since
In
my
last week?
evacuation, yeah, it's been kind of a crazy 2 weeks, as we've mentioned before. So I think from a resource standpoint, it makes a lot of sense to partner with the county, because I don't feel at this point that we have the resources and staffing that is needed to make effective programming and also to manage it. And I think to kind of clarify on what Peter's asking, I think once the city, if you guys choose to allocate all of our funding to the county, then it would be the county that would administer the programming on, so if whatever program they have for the veterans kind of component, then that application would go to the county and not back to the city.
Would we
Correct.
have some say in the money that we did donate? In other words, if we donate it all to you and then we come and say, we want to put some of it towards this veterans home, is that something that the county would be willing to consider? Hard to say at this
They don't
point.
want that.
You know, well, what I will say is this, is we, you know, we originally thought the city of Wairika was interested in being a lead applicant for many of the cities, and they approached us and said, we not only don't feel like, we not only don't have the capacity to accept delegated funding, but we won't be applying for our allocation, and can we delegate it to you? And so working with 9 cities in addition to ours, right? That means we have to write a separate application, separate 5-year plan. We have to do everything separately still for all of those jurisdictions. And speaking for our own capacity, we don't have the capacity to do a special project in every single separate jurisdiction. And the funding is not as significant if it's not collected, you know, for fewer programs. So at this time, we can't do like a specific project in Dunsmuir and also one in Doris. We wouldn't be able to accept the funding under those conditions.
Understand?
Yeah. And but that's in this moment. That isn't to say we wouldn't consider doing a project in Dunsmuir in the future, because we would, and we have discussed doing a project in Dunsmuir. You know, we don't want our services to only be accessible to people in Wairika. You know, that's a challenge, and we don't want them to be accessible only to the I-5 corridor, right? We're a huge county, and we have to, you know, try and provide access to those entire regions. So we have and would consider doing a project in Dunsmuir at some point, but I can't promise that you would be able to give specific direction on this 5-year plan for that. I would say that now is your moment for input.
I think appropriately, you know, if the county is managing the program, and if we had a project that came before us and somebody's interested in doing something like that, I would refer them to Matt.
Sure, makes
And
sense.
I will just say, even though it is a 5-year sector, this is a continuous grant cycle. So after the 5 years, we'll get another 5 years.
That's
That
what's.
will continue with the SB2 funding.
Thank you
All I
for
said
bringing
is
that
that
up,
it's
Juliana. Yeah, that's what's really special about this program. There are programs that are much less work for a lot more money, but what's special about this program is that it's ongoing in a way that is unusual for housing grants. They're often one-time grants. There's a lot of money right now for housing, but most of it is big one-time grants because it's really important to the current state administration. But this is ongoing, and that gives you time to strategize and to plan. There are expenditure deadlines, so you couldn't just like hold on to this funding forever until you had enough to do something. But in terms of delegating funding, the state is very clear that you have to delegate in the 5-year planning cycles. You have to match that. So the funding would be tied, we would be tied in that legally binding agreement and could not exit it for this 5-year planning cycle. So what that means is the next 2 NOFAs, if you would have to stay with the county. You'll see in the agreement that I drafted that I added the opportunity for parties to notify each other that they were no longer interested in continuing, and also for automatic renewal. So essentially, after the next 2 NOFAs, you'll have an opportunity to reassess the partnership.
Okay, unless there's any other questions, we'll close it for public comment and then come back for discussion. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for your time.
Definitely. Okay, open this up for public comment. If there's any public comment in the room, please come forward and talk at the podium. If there's anybody out on Zoom, raise your hand. Okay, there's nobody. I close public comment.
So yeah, it's a monster grant. Wairika is not going forward because we took a look at the requirements. So to put together a 5-year plan, which we would, if we as an applicant move forward, we would have 48 months from getting the funding to do this 5-year plan. We don't have the staff expertise. Wairika doesn't have the staff expertise. I can't do this stuff. One of the things to note about a lot of these programs is it's also linked to supportive services, which again, the county is much more equipped to be able to do that because they already provide a lot of those services. The other thing too is the county has put out or is going to put out a request for qualifications for an affordable housing and supportive services firm to come into the county. So there is an opportunity to do that with the programming. I think funneling it through the county for at least this 5-year period is super beneficial for all of the small cities because going back to the sentiment that Rico brought up with our housing element, we're much too small to all continue to do things alone. And especially as Madeline pointed out, with housing projects now costing anywhere from $15 to $25 million a piece, it's not going to be possible for us to do it by ourselves. So one of the things that Wairika is pushing with their housing element update that we're hoping that the other jurisdictions will do is to not only go to a multi-year, multi-jurisdictional housing element, but to also do a Siskiyou County Housing Authority, which we do not have available to us at the moment. I think it's something that Dunsmuir should look into as well. It's similar to the Solid Waste Joint Powers Authority that we're in. Going back to it, this type of grant is similar to our bottle recycling program that we do, is we allocate those funds to the county every year. They apply on our behalf, they manage the funds, and they audit. I think that's the bigger thing is we've been talking about, Blake being lagging in terms of the 2-year budget and the audit and having all this extra work. Putting something like this program on his plate as well is not something I think would be beneficial for the city as a whole.
Well, the one question I have going forward then is does the resolution as listed here do what we want to do? I see the recommendations over here, and the agreement, as I understand it, is this would let us pass it on to the county. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
I'm ready to make a motion. If we're having no more discussion.
Well, yeah, go ahead. We have to do the by name and title only, but, right?
No, here's the
No,
motion.
resolutions you don't have to say by title only.
Okay.
Motion to approve resolution 2022-21 and the agreement with Siskiyou County to be the program applicant and administrator of the PHLA funds for Dunsmuir.
Oh, I see it. I missed that down there. Okay.
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, but do we roll call this?
We're not spending money, we're giving
We
money
just
away.
gave money away?
Yeah.
Still, okay.
We're just a
okay.
pass-through.
Any opposed? No opposed? Motion carries.
I do have a question. Does the city of Dunsmuir have a seat at the COC?
No, actually,
What's
So-
the COC?
so HUD administers its homeless programs and solutions through what are called continuums of care. And Siskiyou County is part of the NorCal Continuum of Care. It's actually 7 counties. So we're part of 7 counties in one continuum of care, which is highly unusual. But so essentially HUD tells us how we have to collect data. They tell us eligibility criteria for anything that they fund, and they funnel all of this through the continuum of care. So because we're a 7-county continuum of care, even though there's an executive governing board, which includes representation from each county also has a separate advisory board. And the mayor of Wairika is currently the chair of the Siskiyou Advisory Board. So the interesting thing about the Siskiyou Advisory Board is it actually began as Team Shasta. Did you ever hear about a group called Team Shasta? So they started a group to address homelessness in Mount Shasta. So it was a group in Mount Shasta that started the coalition that eventually became the Siskiyou County COC Advisory Board. However, since I have been running the advisory board, there has been attendance only from one city in South County, and that's Weed. And that member is not a voting member, although they are welcome to submit an application. and that could be presented to the advisory board. So if anyone is interested in representing Dunsmuir or even bringing more representation from South County to that table, I'm the person to see, and I would love to make that happen.
I just figure that's probably a good vehicle for you to stay on the county's radar for veteran housing, is that would be the group that you would go to.
Well,
Yeah, and we get funding specifically through the COC, and those decisions are made at these boards.
I'm going to give all of my materials from tonight to Stephen Bryan, the executive director of not only the Dunsmuir
Yes, I'm
Community
acquainted
Resource
with
Center,
Steve.
but how many other cities? And of course, he answers to Wairika ultimately with the notion none of the small communities have the bandwidth to deal with homeless people, to deal with severely mentally challenged people, to deal with people with substance abuses. We hear from the sheriff's deputy over and over, there's a few psych beds, but not very many in the jail. So if we are going to delegate whatever we're delegating to the county, the more we could have a coordinated effort for those populations.
Yes.
I think we'll just catch up with you.
Yeah, you're
offline
welcome
and
to.
then
And in terms of
appreciate it.
strategy, we do have the county has a 10-year plan to end homelessness, and the COC for the 7 counties, they also have a new plan actually that was just recently developed. So that's like kind of part of our way of collaborating, but you have my contact card in your folder, so feel free to reach out to me and we can talk about more ways for Dunsmuir to be involved.
Thank you for your presentation.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
I do have to admit, though, it would have been kind of fun to see the brother-sister routine here.
Oh, I'm glad he wasn't here to give me the hard questions.
Okay, any other items before we adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone. That was pretty painless. Again, that worked pretty well with that special meeting.